my wife and I were not in a good place. My daughter didn't even want to spend time with me. My wife's family was like, we don't like being around you. Like it was ugly. Like it was really ugly, really ugly. I had gained weight again. I was depressed. I was like mopey. It was like I was this dark storm cloud hovering around people. And so literally it got to a point where it's like, okay, what do I have to lose? And what do I have to gain? And I was like, if I maintain this, I'm going to have this company and that's all I'm going to have. That's it. Because I'm going to be overweight, depressed, childless, wifeless, friendless, familyless, soulless, happyless. Or I could make a hard decision, and I've made plenty of those. And I look back and I'm like, they told me I'd never walk again. They told me I couldn't tie that world record. They told me I couldn't do it. I'm like, is this another one of those things where like I have to prove it? I have to prove it. I'm like, I've been trying to prove this for 8 years and I proved it.
That is George Bryant this week on the Do It For Yourself podcast. Hey, everybody. How's it going? This week on the podcast, I have a guest that I am really looking forward to sharing my conversation with you. But before we get into who my guest is and what they are all about, just really quick, I wanted to first wish everyone well. I know this is a crazy time. This is probably lasting longer than most of us thought that it would. And I just hope that you are all staying safe, doing what you can right now, and protecting yourselves and protecting those around you, so that we can all get through this. If you are somebody who's on the front lines, just know that we appreciate you and we appreciate everything that you're doing, and putting yourself out there. So, um, with that being said, my guest this week is George Bryant. And George Bryant is the creator of Civilized Caveman, which is a recipe blog. George is actually not the owner of Civilized Caveman anymore, and we will get into how that came to be. But George comes from a very rough upbringing through his childhood, and he actually went on to go into the military because of the structure that would be involved in the structure that he would get from the military. And unfortunately, he had to figure out what he was going to do, post military and post time serving. So that is how the idea of Civilized Caveman was born. And it's very, very interesting to listen to George's story and see how things transform and things kind of went awry. So I'll leave that up to George. I'll let him kind of tell the story. But I'm really looking forward to sharing this interview with you. George is an amazing guy. I've been following him for a really long time. So I really think that you're going to enjoy. Cool. All right, man. Well, George, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I'm really excited to take a deep dive into your story. I am someone who's been following along both with your story and the days of Civilized Caveman, which we'll definitely get into. But I've made the recipes. I've been following the journey. I watched the early morning ice baths.
Oh man, I
So
still do them. I still do them.
yeah, I'm definitely really excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, me too, man. It's an honor. And honestly, like I'm gonna say this, like thank you for trusting me and following me and like letting me share on your platform. Like it's a gift. And I appreciate the patience as I had to reschedule some stuff. So thank you.
Hey, it's all good, man. It's all good. Sometimes life happens.
That's right, man. That is the game that we play.
Yeah, for sure. So, just real quick, kind of up front, just give everybody a brief introduction and, like, 1 to 3 points about George Bryant and who you are and what you're doing.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. The most important things for me is I'm a amazing husband, father, and I'll say pet owner because I have a new baby ball python that my wife and daughter got, and I now figured out that I love snakes. And so that's the best way to kind of describe me. And I live my life trying to use my past and my story as a means to help and inspire other people, which also gives me a path of accountability and healing. And so now I say I spend all my days helping entrepreneurs or businesses build and scale their businesses by teaching them that relationships beat algorithms. And so I run a mastermind. I consult some of the largest companies in the world. I've built a couple 10-figure companies. I've helped over 500 companies scale to 7, 8, 9, 10 figures. And now I even consult professional sports teams on how to do marketing correctly and teach them how to care about their customers. And we're going to get into how I got here. But yeah, I started a long, long time ago by using food to create a journey on the internet. And I learned a lot in 10 years on how to be good in this world when running business and marketing. And I apply all those lessons in my current life. And I run a podcast now called Mind of George, the Mind of George Show. And so it's kind of nice. I've been waiting 9 years to launch that. And that's about the biggest summary I can give you. The shortest one, at least. Because you know that this you've known me for a long time. So if you ask me a question and stick a quarter in me, there's a good chance I'm just gonna go until the podcast ends. And so I'm gonna every time I take a breath, I'm gonna pause and see if you want to speak. And I own that all day.
Yes, 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 and I have been a follower of yours for a long time, and something else that I just wanted to touch on and say that I agree with you 1000% is that, what you said about building relationships.
Mhm.
When it comes to business, personal life, I don't, it really doesn't matter. I think it's very, very timely right now because, relationships are super important and relationships are what build businesses, but I mean, it's really what pulls us through sometimes like we're in right now too.
Yeah, for sure. 1,000%. I mean, like, you know what? In the times that we're in right now, I said everyone's like, "What do you think happened?" I'm like, "Well, people that didn't want to take the red pill got unplugged on purpose by force." And welcome to the matrix. Like
Mhm.
that that's really really what I said. But when I think about it, what I love and finding the silver lining in all of this is that it kind of stripped away all the fluff. It stripped away all the preconceived conceptions and notions about how things are or where things are. It kind of focused us to get back to the basics. And really, what we were left with is like, wow, when everything's stripped away, I can't leave my house. I can't do this. Like, what do we have? And we have relationships. And I told everybody, I said, what's happening and what happened to me, even in the work that I've done in my life is I was forced to be in a relationship with the one person I have to spend the rest of my life with, whether I like it or not, and I ignore the most, and that's myself. And it was a really, really eye-opening experience, and I've done a lot of healing and growth in this time, and it's allowed me to deepen my relationships with my wife and my kids and my business partners. And miraculously, it's the reason that I've basically lost a business in the middle of this. I was losing 70 grand a day, and yet we came out positive on the other side. And so there's a reason I trademarked relationships beat algorithms. I think it's going to be my motto for the rest of my time in this existential meat suit that we don't understand.
And so one of the things that we've touched on just even already right in the front of the show here is that you are very open, you're very honest, and you really put yourself out there both from when you were doing Civilized Caveman and then sharing some things there, and then even onto what you're doing now with your marketing. But I would imagine that, as you just said, that came with work because from a very early age, um, you experienced some bullying. So can you tell me about some of the
Yeah.
bullying that you experienced and kind of what was going on, even at like the youngest age of like
Yeah.
kindergarten?
Oh man. Yeah. And like I want to share, for anybody listening to this, like I share my story because I'm on the other side of it. And I want to say that because I'm going to say some things, I'm going to talk about some things, and you're going to hear me talk about it in light. And I've really healed all of it, like all of it. And, a mentor of mine a long time ago, because I've written a few books, and he looked at me and he said, "You can never write a book that you're in the middle of." And so I don't ever share a story or experience that I'm in the middle of. And so, yeah, my childhood wasn't roses and rainbows, and I'm super grateful that it happened. But yeah, my parents struggled with addiction, drugs, and any other addiction you can imagine. There was a lot of physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse later in my life. But it was a pretty unsupportive, kind of scary place to grow up. We moved a lot of inconsistencies, and so yeah, all the way back to kindergarten. I was the minority where I grew up. We were in Bloomfield, Connecticut, and I was one of two white children in the class. And so like I was bullied on the other side. And so, we didn't belong there. It wasn't the nicest place to be, but that's where we could afford to be. So yeah, it all started, externally in kindergarten, and yeah, I'm talking, and I even remember some of the kids' names, like Ike. Ike was the first kid who ever broke my front teeth. It was in, I think, kindergarten or first grade, and we were on the bus, and he took my head and smashed into a window because I was white and I didn't fit in, and knocked two of my front teeth out. And there were, there were kids that got suspended and expelled in kindergarten because they stabbed each other with keys, and it was a pretty violent place to be. And so, yeah, I don't remember times where in my childhood or schooling or any of that stuff that I wasn't bullied. And I didn't really have a role model or an older sibling. It was kind of me. I had a younger sibling that I tried my best to protect and take care of. And I feel like the cards were stacked against me because, the town knew who my parents were, like the cops knew who my parents were. People would hear things like I had raggedy clothes. Like I always smelled like smoke, and it was dirty, and I got dropped off in like, crazy broken down trashed vehicles and things like that. So it was a pretty rough go, per se, is the best way that I could say it. And yeah, there's lots of specific incidents, but most of my memories when it comes to schooling, I have two very, very profound memories. And number one is that there were quite a few people that I bumped into where now where I am in my life, I could see like the pureness and love in their heart and just like this level of acceptance. And I still talk to some of those people. um, and number two is that pretty much across the board, every teacher that I ever had were some of the most empathetic and compassionate people that I've ever met. And I probably only am here on this planet and made it through school and even had an opportunity or chance to succeed because of their belief in me and them seeing things that I couldn't see, and their level of care kind of over me, even them without knowing, right? Like, and I'm looking at it now. I'm like, well, of course, a teacher when I'm in kindergarten and I have my teeth knocked out, or my parents look like that, know what the hell's going on. But at the time, you're like, oh, they don't know, right? They
Mhm.
don't know.
Mhm.
Um, and so, like, I'm always grateful when I look back and think about that. And here's what's nuts: I still talk to some of those teachers. I actually, here's, you want to know what's something really funny? I got a Facebook message 3 days ago from my gym teacher from junior high asking for business advice because he's launching a new career and wondering if I would help him. And I was like, hell yes, what can I give you? Like, thank you for supporting me
Mhm.
25 years ago. Um,
Wow.
but yeah, pretty small world, right? It's pretty
That's
interesting.
amazing. No,
So
but I
yeah.
mean, that's amazing to hear, and that's also the beauty of the internet, and obviously we could get into a whole separate podcast of debates about the internet and what's good and what's bad about it, but, in instances like that, it makes you think that this this thing that we have and this access that we have to one another, is something that is truly it's a gift if used properly,
1000%.
and so
1000%. Yeah. I'm going to agree with you a lot because I'm like, I've heard your wisdom on this beginning of our call before we were recording. I'm like, yep, this is going to be a fun one. I like this. I agree. I agree. I agree.
Good, good. So, one of the things that I have personally experienced is that when it comes to bullying, as you get older, there's a point where the bullying gets worse before
Mm.
it gets better. And from my personal experience, it seems around middle school is where kids really learn how to just be assholes. Now, granted, it seems like in your situation, things, these kids they were mean from the start. I mean, to have your teeth knocked out in kindergarten, like that's to me that's crazy. But you know,
I think there's a big distinction, and I know, and I appreciate what you said. Kids consciously learn how to express their own experiences of trauma at home when they are in middle school, right? Like, it becomes, you understand the difference between right or wrong, right?
hmm hmm
And even in those moments, though, those kids are just expressing what happens to them at home or doesn't happen to them at home.
hmm
The thing about the kindergarten piece that breaks my heart still to this day is at that point, there's still a very, very, very blurred line between good and bad. And so in their lives, that was normal. Like,
Mhm.
that wasn't a bad thing for them. There was like, "This is what mommy and daddy do. This is what our siblings do." Like, and, like, I'm glad that I've done the work that I've done to heal this, and I mean, I've quite frankly, I've invested 7 figures in my emotional health over the last 15 years, but
Mhm.
to be here now, like, I just wanna make that distinction because, like, to this day, I've actually gone and seen some of these people 25 years later, and I'm like, "Hey, I just wanted to say hey and thank you," and they're like, not even memories of it, and they're like, "Oh my god," like, it was a different dad every week. It was like my mom was getting beat, like the cops were there every night, and so, like, I do wanna say that, like, I have zero, 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 zero animosity, resentment, or anything. When I look back now, I almost cry thinking about, like, my life seemed hard and bad at the time, but how could it have been for that kid to, like, think it was normal to smash another kid's teeth or hit him in the window? Like, what was happening on that world that, like, that was even, like, on the realm of possibility? And, like, that's I just oh, yeah.
So, do you feel like, things got worse towards that middle school and high school, or did it kind
Mine
of keep on the same
No,
trajectory?
no, mine peaked because so I when I was, kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, I lived in, Bloomfield, Connecticut, so I was between, like, West Hartford and Bloomfield, and then in 5th grade, we moved to the suburbs in Massachusetts, and I went from, that being the minority to, like, country club rich white people, except we weren't, right? It just we lived I went to a school system that had 3 towns combined, and so, there's a lot more there. Suburbs of Boston, the Patriots Stadium, a lot of professional athletes around where we were, and so it shifted. Like, I think when I was younger, it was like, "Oh, I know I'm about to get my ass beat," right? Like, this is where I live, and here it was like, "Oh, now it's that, like, sneaky conniving stuff." So, like, the bullying changed forms. It wasn't as much physical, but the emotional part of it was, like, horrendous, right? And things that, like, I don't wanna compare, right? But, like, if I had to take, like, I don't know, getting, punched in the stomach versus having somebody cut my hair off, I would take
Mhm.
the stomach all day, right?
Mhm.
Or, getting punched in the stomach or having people, like, cut my clothes or trash my locker every day for, a year, I would take the hit, and it changed. And I think the intensity for me changed because, like, I grew up in, like, somewhat of a physical violent home that was somewhat normal. The emotional side is what took a massive toll on me, and, like, there were times, like, 7th grade, I'll never forget this, and if she listens to the podcast, great, we've reconciled, but, it was in science class, and, like, I was already pretty embarrassing, like, I had a massive overbite, I had to wear headgear, my parents couldn't afford to fix my teeth, all my clothes were hand-me-downs, and then I was rocking a bowl cut, and I'm talking like a bowl cut of bowl cuts, like an actual bowl cut, and I was in science class, and Caitlin McKenzie came up behind me, grabbed the back of my hair with a chunk of scissors, and chopped off the top middle section of my hair, like 3 square inches, and I was like, I still remember that to this day, like it was yesterday. I can tell you what I was wearing. I can tell you what she was wearing, what the teacher did, all of it, and it was different. So, like, it just exhibited itself differently. And then, like, where when I was younger, kids would want to fight me, right? Like, I also, and just to be clear, when that kindergarten through 4, I had my front teeth knocked out 3 times. Um, the head into the bus window, the head into the desk, and then a third one. I don't know if you ever remember the in the gymnasium, the metal ball cages that they would put all the play balls in. The
Mhm.
third one was my face was smashed into that, and then somebody kicked me in the back of the head, and then it broke my teeth. Um, and so, but in middle school and like junior high and high school was different, right? It was like that malicious, like antagonizing or like planting seeds for people to come get mad at me, and I got suspended 3 times because 3 people came and picked fights with me for something I didn't even do and never even heard of, and I didn't even fight back. Like, I didn't know how to fight. I just got my ass beat, and then I got suspended. And so it just, I don't know. The younger time felt just a lot more direct, right? Like you kind of know what you're going to get. And then the older time felt just a whole lot more like manipulative and vindictive. Like there was planning. It was like premeditated, if that makes sense. That was kind of the difference for me.
Okay. Yeah, well, and I mean, that makes sense because, kids get smarter as they get older, not just book smarter, but they just all around. They pick up on things as they grow and learn and mature, and they start to see things, and they can then, turn around and apply them in their lives. And just as you were saying, if a child was at home and seeing, something done to mommy or daddy or, brother or sister, whatever the case may be,
Mm,
if they start to pick up on, some of these nonverbal things and some of these, cues as to being sneaky or, things like that, like, they can then turn around and start to apply those things as well.
mhm.
So at around, towards the end of high school, you make this decision that is, to me, looking at your story, somewhat of a surprising decision, and at the same time, somewhat of a not so surprising decision. You make a choice to get away and enlist in the military. So, what interested you about going into the military? I kind of have my own assumption as
Yeah.
to what it could have been, but talk to me a little bit about that versus just getting away, just running away.
Totally, totally. Yeah, here's what's interesting, like, even hearing you say it, like, I'm still to this day, and I'm talking 19 years later, still as shocked as you that I joined the military. Like, quite frankly, that was it. And my dad was an army vet, but not really like a military dude. Like, we never talked about it. It wasn't anything I was called to. I had no pre-existing notions about it. Nothing. Like nothing. And most of high school I avoided it like the plague. Like I worked like 4 or 5 jobs. I had to pay for everything myself. Like my teachers passed me like literally out of like, okay, this kid's not going to make it if we don't help him. And social service was involved at this point, caseworkers, restraining orders, like all that stuff was happening. And so for me, I just got to a point where, like, luckily I never followed in the path, right? I never became a drug addict. I never got into drinking. Like, I didn't want to exhibit those behaviors. I knew I always wanted something different, but I didn't really know what it looked like. And luckily, like, one of my best friend growing up, his parents were very white collar, like very wealthy, well off, but very humble. They never said anything. I lived in their basement. They would support me. They would buy me food and no military experience whatsoever. But like, I realized that, like, if I stay here, like, it's not gonna end well. Like, I'm not going anywhere. Like, what am I gonna do? Like, work and do, like, work at a fast food restaurant. Like, nothing wrong with that, but, like, I was like, I didn't wanna be around anything that was there, and I was like, "Okay, well, I'll run away." With what money? Like, where am I gonna
Mhm.
go?
Mhm.
Like, what am I gonna do? And, at that point, I'm 16, right? So I'm hearing things like people are in the military coming back, kids in high school are like, "Oh, we're doing it, recruiters are around," right? And, like, I never even talked to a recruiter, but I just got the idea in my brain, and I was like, "Okay, well, I get paid. I get food, I get shelter. It's like guaranteed pay. Okay, like this can't be that hard." And then I looked at it, and then that's when kind of like my personality took over though, and also my core wound, right? So like my core wound, based on my childhood, is like I'm not good enough, and I'm afraid people leave me. So I've spent my life in the pursuit of perfection, and I recognize it now, which is used as a tool. But when I was a kid, it was a survival mechanism. So I'm looking at all of it, right? And all I wanted was my dad to be proud of me for once, right? And to get attention. And so I looked at it and I'm like, okay, what's the hardest thing I can do? I need to prove to myself that I can do this. But you know what? Like, really, what I was thinking is like, let me show everybody and rub it in their damn faces. Like, let me show you. Like, you can beat me, you can put me in the mud, you can do whatever. But like at the end of the day, I'm still going to stand up, and for all the wrong reasons. But when you're 17 years old and you've lived that kind of life, like you kind of have a permission slip to not be mature and be like, I'm going to show you, right? Like,
Mhm.
I'm okay with that. And so I was like, what's the hardest thing I could do? And I looked at it all, and I didn't really know the difference between the Marines, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, but I was like, the Marines, like, I want to be a Marine. I'm like, I'm going to show those mofos, right? And I didn't want to come beat their ass. I didn't want to do any of that. I just want to be like, I'm going to show you that I won, right? You broke my nose. You beat me up. I didn't fight back. And yet, like, I'm standing here doing something and you're not. And that was kind of the thing. And I walked into the recruiter's office and they're like, you're too fat. Literally, I walked in. That's what they told me. I'm too fat. And like, you'll never join. And so I left. And 6 months later, I came back, and I was no longer too fat. So I forged my parents' signature and I joined the Marine Corps when I was 17. And then the moment high school ended, and I mean moment, like, I think it was like a couple days, I was out and on a plane to Paris Island, South Carolina on July 29th of 2002.
And the reason that I said that I was surprised, but not surprised, was because there's one thing that is common across all branches of the military. And I would argue to say that it's probably something that you hadn't had for the first 17 years of your life. And that was, well, maybe aside from school, you were going to be surrounded by structure.
Structure. Yeah, it's always structure.
And
Always.
that's kind of why I was leaning towards, being not so surprised, because I had assumed that having that structure was something that kind of pulled you in. But were you mature enough to realize that there was gonna be that amount of structure?
No. No, it wasn't like I was called to the safety of it, but not recognizing that it was the structure that was
Mhm,
giving it, right?
mhm.
I was called to the certainty of it, right? Like, "Oh, I'm gonna get a paycheck, like, I'm gonna have food no matter what," right? Like, "I'm gonna be away from all of this bullshit." Like, that's what, like, my brain was, but, like, in mature language looking back, what it really was structure, right? Like, that's what it was for the first time in my life, like, I was like, "Wow, like, this is what they say. This is how they hold themselves. This is how they carry themselves." And I was like, "God, I wanna be that man. Like, I wanna have those traits in my life." Like, that's kinda what it is. And so it was structure 1,000%, but it took me many years to realize, like, that's what I was called for. Because even to this day, I spent 12 years of my life on active duty, right? 3 combat deployments, everything. And it's really interesting how resistant to structure I am to this day because I swung so far in the other direction and I had to stay out of survival that, like, I kind of am still to this day figuring out where my center point is because, like, the first 4 years I was like, yeah, 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 but then after that I was like, okay, why the hell am I getting up at 4:45? Why am I here an hour and a half before everybody else because of somebody's ego, right? Like, I started to really mature into it and I'm like, okay, this isn't structure. This is just kind of like clown circus manipulation at this point, but that is really really what it is. And I still think about it to this day. I still think about it to this day, but for sure, like, you nailed it on the head. Like, whether I realized it or not, or whether it was a conscious choice or not, there was a piece of safety. And like, it's interesting even saying this. Like, I'm like, the Marine Corps screamed safety to me. Like, that gives you a
Mhm,
window into how my childhood was. I was like, yeah, that's going to be the safest place I can go. Fucking war,
mhm.
right? Like, go. And so, yeah, it was structure for sure. And to this day, it still is. I mean, I still have these things come up for me. They're just not coming up from a place of like pain. They're coming up from a place of like, what does my life have to look like for me to be in my power, right? And now, like, having containers and, an office versus like working on my laptop and having a pretty structured routine of non-negotiables, not in the time, but like, hey, I'm going to get this done every day, is kind of where my sweet spot is, and that's kind of what helps me be successful. So yeah, structure is definitely a big part of it for me.
One of the things that you mentioned there was that when you walked into the office, they said, "You're never gonna make it, you're too fat," and then you had walked back in 6 months later,
Hmm.
and you were no longer too fat to do that. And when I was following you in the early stages, one of the things that I learned about was your unhealthy relationship with food. So,
Hmm.
is that the point right there where you think your unhealthy relationship started with food?
No, no, it's exacerbated. So it started earlier when the sexual abuse happened. So nine experienced sexual abuse, 13 experienced sexual abuse, and that was kind of like a big trigger for me. It wasn't my family; it was outside my family, and I didn't act on it. But then when I was like 14, 15, right, getting into high school, like, I really struggled with my weight. I was very, very overweight, and it wasn't even the bullying, man. I got bullied. I got picked on for being fat, like, everything you remember, to the truffle shuffle, like all that stuff from the Goonies and everything. And but it was actually I know the moment, and it was the first time that I'd ever felt accepted. And I was asked to go to a dance. I was asked by a girl to go to a dance, and that was not normal for me.
Mhm.
And I was really excited, so I had to go get a suit. And I convinced my parents to come help me rent a tux, and I tried them on, and the guy came out and he's like, "Hey, listen, it's going to cost a little bit more because the jacket that he needs to wear doesn't match the pant size. They're a little disproportionate, and I needed a lot bigger pants because I was a little hefty." And it didn't even bother me. It was the comments that my mother made, that kind of spiraled me out of control, and I went home and I was so upset, and I mean so upset. Like, I was dry heaving, bawling, hyperventilating, and in the middle of it, I threw up. And when I threw up, I felt better. And that was the day that I started struggling with bulimia. I was 15 years old. And from that point forward, any time that my life felt out of control, like I was really triggered, or I was having like what I would consider like a panic attack, right? Like my chest is heavy, I can't breathe, like I have so much rage in my body, I don't even know where to put it. Um, I would force myself to purge, and I would always feel better because it gave me a semblance of control over something. And you know, then it spiraled into now, oh, if I eat all that food, now I can purge it up, and then I won't, gain weight and blah blah blah. And then when the Marine Corps came, is where that kind of unhealthy relationship with food got paired with an unhealthy relationship with working out. And the combination together is what helped me lose the weight, but not in a good way. And,
Mhm.
to say this, like the unhealthy relationship with food to go all the way back started when I was born. Like I'll summarize this. I have a brother who's my full brother. I love him to pieces. He only lives about 10 minutes away from me now. And in my entire life, 0 to 18, I don't have one memory of my mother, my father, me, and my brother having dinner or a meal at a table together in 18 years of my life. I ate cereal. I ate pizza. I ate nothing. I ate Pringles. I ate whatever was there. Beefaroni out of the can was my favorite thing because they didn't really make us food. They didn't really do anything. They ate like crap. It was intermittent. They were on drugs, not on drugs, drinking, not drinking. Like it was kind of all over the place. So I had no idea like what any sort of semblance of like food, healthy food or anything was until I got to the military. Like that was it. Like that was my entry point of like, oh, there's other food. Like, oh, you can eat and feel better or eat and lose weight or, eat and be healthy. Like it was kind of like all of it wrapped up. But the Marine Corps was kind of like the magnifying glass because then I went from trying to be an athlete to fit it in high school, not being successful, right? To like going into an organization where I have to be like the leanest, meanest fighting machine in the world. And like, I'd never run more than like, I don't know, a mile, right? Or ever done a pull up in my life. And so it was kind of like the magnifying glass into what, turned into an amazing life that I've had since then. But yeah, it was all stacked up and it kind of became this catalyst at that point. So that was kind of how we got there.
And, so that's actually very timely because I was going to ask you if you were still binging and purging when enlisted in the military, or if it was something that you had addressed before enlisting. So this was something that you were still going through while you were in the military.
1,000% when possible. And the military is where it really phased in and out, and it was really
Mhm.
dependent
Mhm.
on how I felt in that moment, right? And so obviously, like I went to boot camp, and I remember specifically because I had to be 191 pounds to go to boot camp. I went to boot camp at 191, and 13 weeks later, I weighed 151 in 13 weeks.
Wow.
And I have photos of this. My cheekbones were collapsed. Like you could see my jawline structure like a skeleton. Like I was so skinny. But I felt great. So
Mhm.
I was like, I'm skinny, right? Like I don't have food issues. Like I'm running 3 miles in 19 minutes and I've never run a mile in like 10, right? Like I got really fit really fast. And so it would really depend. And like I was so busy and consumed, like nothing happened at boot camp, most of my training. And I like basically that time with that level of structure and basically oversight, right? Like, cause it's like you're in prison for 13 weeks.
Mhm.
You don't have a moment, right? Like there's no doors on the stalls. You can't even take a poop. Like they're watching you poop. You're pooping next to 30 other dudes on toilets with no walls, right? Like there's no, like, where am I going to do it? Right. I'm like, oh, if I run too hard, I puke, but that's natural. And so it basically kind of like cold turkeyed me for probably 6 months. And then after that point, I felt good because I was in shape and I was like, there and all of it. And so it kind of just went away. And then there were emotional triggers, right? Like the first time I saw somebody die, the first time I lost one of my Marines. And then like that's when my eating disorder started becoming retied into emotions, not how I looked.
Mhm.
And then that's kind of how it went through my career. And there were times that it came up and came down and came up and came down. And I know you're going to ask me, so I'm going to go there anyways. Uh, I graduated boot camp October 25th of 2002. And then by the time all my trainings were done, my schoolings were done, I think it was like August of 2003 that I got stationed at Cherry Point, North Carolina. And then I was there for like maybe 3 months, and they're like, "Hey, by the way, you're going to Somalia." So they sent me to Lejeune. I was there for 3 months, and, like, I think May of 2004, I got on an airplane and I went to Somalia, my first deployment for 13 months. And when I was over there, I got a really, really horrific injury that was kind of like stacked up. And so I got what's called exercise-induced compartment syndrome. Basically, I was too big for my frame. I weighed like, maybe 210, 215 pounds at the time because I came out of boot camp, right? And then I started eating and still working out. And I started to really like get into shape, right? Like I was packing on muscle, I was lifting, and I really had that Napoleon complex taking over. And I was like, I'm gonna be a bodybuilding monster. I'm gonna go home and crush every fucking kid's head in high school. Like that's really like what I thought, like quite frankly. And so I lifted obsessively, I ate obsessively, and then when I got into the desert, all we could do was eat, work out, sleep. That's it, right? Like any free time we had, that's all we did. And so I got really, really big, like 225 of like solid muscle. And then I had combat gear on all the time, like 100 pounds, and eventually it wore away and like basically broke my legs. And so I finished my tour there and I came home and I ended up having to have emergency surgery because I shot clots everywhere. And it was something to like, oh, you have shin splints, whatever. Well, it wasn't shin splints at all. So they performed emergency surgery the day I got home. And I ended up having to spend 12 months in a wheelchair and 18 months of physical therapy. And I gained a lot of weight. I ended up at almost 260 pounds at my heaviest. And I'm only 5'7". Like I'm short, like I'm midget, like I'm Mighty Mouse territory, right? So 5'7" at 260 is I was wide as I was tall.
Mhm.
And I was in a wheelchair and I became addicted to hydrocodone. Quite frankly, I was on a PCA pump, which is a patient controlled anesthetic, because when they do that surgery, do not Google this if you just ate. But it's called a fasciotomy, a double fasciotomy or a bilateral fasciotomy. And once they cut you open, they can't sew you shut because of the swelling. So every day they have to debride your legs twice a day and then sew it more and sew it more. So there were times it took 3 weeks to close one incision. And the incision was from my knee to my ankle on each
Oof.
side of each leg. So 5 surgeries total. And so you can't be on certain medications because your blood thins and you bleed, right? So
Mhm.
pain management wasn't really a thing. And so I had a needle basically into my spine. I would push a button every 6 minutes and it would give me like morphine or whatever. And then they transitioned me to hydrocodone. And I basically followed the same pattern. I would take my pain pills every day, be super depressed, and then I would order like 2 large pizzas, like pepperoni. And I remember I would order 2 pepperoni pizzas. I would have an entire bottle of Frank's Red Hot and an entire bottle of ranch. And by the time I was done, I only had 1 or 2 pieces of pizza left, and the ranch was gone and the Frank's was gone. And then I would purge it up. And then I would repeat that process. And that went on for like 6 months. It was some of the darkest, darkest times of my life. And I even attempted suicide. I took somewhere north of 40 pills of hydrocodone, um,
Wow.
intentionally, like fully intentionally. And they were 10, 325, so 400 milligrams of hydrocodone and fucking 35,000 milligrams of Tylenol.
Mhm.
Broke that rule. And I was like, here we go. And that was it. And I woke up the next day feeling better than I'd ever felt in my life. And I quite frankly thought I was in heaven. I didn't really know what it was. And the next couple days were spent in silence and like real reflection. And I was like, that's not for me. Like it like kind of opened up my heart, to be really frank with you. Changed the way I saw myself, changed what was there. Didn't heal anything, but like kind of gave me a new observation.
Mhm.
And so made a commitment to myself in that moment that I wasn't ever going to do that again. Which I didn't keep, but I'm still here. So it will never ever happen again. I'm beyond that point now. And that I would do everything in my power to take care of myself. And I looked at it and I'm like, man, if I don't get better, I'm gonna end up having to go home. And like now I'm, 3 years in, I haven't saved any money. I don't have a new skill set, right? Pulling a
Mhm.
trigger isn't a skill set.
Mhm.
And and what am I gonna go back to? And so it kind of like really pushed me and I started physical therapy and they're like, if you don't make a recovery in the next 4 months, you're getting out. And I was
Mhm.
like, and I was like, what does that mean? They're like, you're out. No money, no nothing, you're out. And I was like, oh hell no. And that really lit a fire under me. I kind of got addicted to working out at that point. I had an awesome physical therapist. I mean, it took me about a month just to learn how to walk again, really. But after that point, it was kind of the wheels are off. I started doing triathlons, I started doing half Ironmans, I was running every day, and I can't feel my legs to this day from the knee down, so it was kind of interesting to kind of relearn this. But then I replaced my addiction to bulimia with my addiction to working out and overtraining like 3 times a day. I mean, and like that was kind of where that kind of progressed. And so the addiction changed, but the result was the same. I was like
Mhm,
trying to
mhm,
run from emotions or run from feelings. And I was like, okay, well, I looked amazing once I lost the weight. It did take me a while to lose the weight, but I lost the weight and I looked amazing, right? And so I didn't really want to like eat and purge. And so I was like, oh, I'll just work out more. I'll just work out more. And so it morphed a lot. Um, and then the bulimia came back. It came back during Afghanistan, and it stuck around for a couple years. And full disclosure, and I talked about this on Caveman. I was privately still bulimic for the first 2 years of Caveman,
mhm.
until I did a keynote and I came out to the world about it. And then I did a podcast and I said, hey, I can't lie to you guys anymore. This is what I've been struggling with. This is why I started this blog, and
Mhm.
this is what I'm letting go of today. And so that's kind of how we got here.
One of the things that, and I don't wanna make it seem like I'm fast forwarding
Oh, no, no,
through,
no, don't. No,
through
you're
your
good.
story, but you did get to go back then, but you were still, were you medically separated or medically discharged? Like, what?
I was later.
Okay.
That was 2005 that all of that happened.
Uh-huh.
And they're like, if you don't get better, you're out. And I was more scared to go home. So I made a full recovery and went back on full duty in 2006. And then I stayed on full duty from 2006 until 2013.
Okay.
Yep. And so in that, I completely was a Marine. I got, promoted, I was actually a staff sergeant on my way out. I was a gunny select. I just didn't get pinned before I got out. I did 2 more deployments. I mean, I was full on as gung ho of a Marine as you could be.
And so then what happened when it was time to
Hmm.
leave?
Yeah. So fast forward the middle section because the middle section is not that good. So we'll get to this section. So, um, I will say the one thing in the middle section that kind of was like a really, I think what gave me the ability to get to this point was in 2008. My dad was diagnosed with metastatic brain and lung cancer, and we had reconciled not our father-son relationship, but we had reconciled our we're kind of friends and in each other's life relationship. My dad was clean, my mom was clean, but damage had been done, right? They would
Mhm,
sued each
mhm.
other for 6 years, like lost everything. I mean, it was horrendous. And my dad had been using again to deal with the pain of his brain tumor. And so all of this came on me. I ended up taking care of him for 6 months until I lost him to cancer. I pulled him off life support on December 5th of 2008. And yeah, that was a big moment for me. Um, because at that point I was like, oh, like anything from this point in my life forward is me. Like, and it always was, right? Like, but my dad loved me to pieces. Like, I miss my father immensely. My dad just had some demons. I mean, my dad had 4 different dads in 5 years, all who beat the shit out of him and his mom. Like, he watched his brother die in a car accident. Like, I can't even imagine the life my both of my parents lived. My mom was the youngest of 12 and sexually abused most of her life. Like, I can't even, like, I look at what they created with me and I was like, man, they really did the best that they could.
Mhm.
Um, because like my mom's still alive, but she doesn't really have much memory, and so like I still see the pain. And I talk to her now. I didn't talk to her for 15 years, but I realized that I couldn't have a relationship with a woman if I didn't have one with my mother, and so I healed it. And I showed up on her doorstep with my now wife. Um, that's another podcast, but yeah, when I think about that moment, I just it was something very sobering about it. And my brother was 18 and had no parents basically. He was basically raising himself like Mowgli, just in a very broken home. And it shifted something in me. And I took what I learned in the Marine Corps about leading and doing all that. And I was like, I need to really be the example. And so it shifted something in me hard, 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 hard. And so then um, in 2012, 2011, 2012, I'm fuzzy on these dates, and you'll understand why in a second. um, I'm fuzzy on these dates, but in 2011 or 12, I was at a new unit in California, and I got deployed to Afghanistan. And within a 2-year period of pre-deployment work. And a lot of people don't know when we deploy for like 7 months, we spend like 7 months prior to that doing training like every day to get ready to deploy.
Mhm.
And then when we come back from that deployment, we do post training and then start training for the next deployment. Because when I was there, we were on a 7-month rotation. So 7 months in Afghanistan, 7 months at home, 7 months in Afghanistan. And so there was like nonstop. So in the span of 2 years, I ended up getting 7 concussions. And I got traumatic brain injury, and I had bleeding on my brain, fluid on my brain, and the three bad ones happened in Afghanistan in the span of 7 months. So I had three pretty horrendous, unconscious, knocking concussions in 7 months. Um, and life pretty much spiraled out of control, right? Like photosensitive, I was passing out from the pain in my headaches. I was puking a couple times a day from the brain injuries. And so when I came back, I had to start getting really treated for these things, brain scans, neurology, like everything you can imagine. And the doctor looked at me and he's like, "Hey man, like it's going to take you 6 months to a year to recover." And he's like, "You've already utilized all of your limited duty boards. So when you're allowed to have 3 limited duty boards, which are 3 6-month periods of like recovery.
Mhm.
And I'd used all of them in 2004, 2005. And he's like, I can buy you some time, man. He's like, but I don't know if I want to." he's
Mhm.
like, he's like, Even thinking about you training gives me anxiety." And I was like, "Man, I'm fine." And he's like, and I actually cried to that doctor, and he's like, "What are you afraid of?" I'm like, "Man, I don't know. I don't have anything. Like, what do I do if I get out? Like, I've been running my whole life." And the guy actually gave me a pretty good pep talk, but he reminded me how I kind of made it, through deployments, became
Mhm.
successful as a Marine, like all these different things. And he said, "Hey, I hate to say this to you." He's like, "I'm gonna have to make a recommendation that you get processed out." And I kind of lost it, but I didn't really fight it at that point. I was so tired, man. Like
Mhm. Yeah.
12 years in the Marine Corps feels like 70 years in life. It's just like purgatory. And I loved it. I loved my Marines, but like it's not an easy thing to do. Like it's not sustainable. Like the life expectancy of somebody got in the Marine Corps after 20 or 30 years is like between 5 and 7 years. Um, because of the change of pace of life. Like we lived in a stimulus environment, right? Like it's kind of mind blowing. So he made the recommendation and they processed me, and it took about 8 months. So yeah, so Afghanistan. Oh, see, I figured it out. Afghanistan was 2011. I came back in 2012. They submitted my board at the end of 2012, and then I got out of the Marine Corps on June 1st of 2013. They came back and they said, "Hey, we're medically separating you." And so the difference between separation and retirement is they like pay you like
Mhm.
medical disability. They
Mhm.
didn't. They said, "Hey, thanks for 12 years. Have a nice life." And I was out the door, and the Marine Corps didn't pay for anything. And I later got benefits through the VA, the Veterans Association, but it's completely separate. And so, yeah, June 1st of 2013 is when I got out. So that's kind of how that whole process worked.
And so, you get out. Obviously, it wasn't something that would have been your first choice, but at the same time, it was something that it seems like you came to terms with, and it was something that had to be done. But once you get out, y- what you were scared of was that you weren't going to have anything to go to.
Yeah,
So you get out, and where do you go? What do
yeah.
you
So,
do?
so let me backdate a little bit, right? Because I got they started that board in 2012. I found paleo in 2010. And so when I was in Afghanistan, I stumbled across Tim. It's funny, these people are my friends now, but Tim Ferriss's book, The
Mhm.
4 Hour Body. And all I read was the diet section, right? Where he's like, eat clean and this for a week and then binge like crazy on the weekend. And I was like, oh, I'm good at that. I've played this game before, right? Like, I was like, you're giving a bulimic a permission to binge. Like, let's go. And it was really interesting though, because I started following that diet and I couldn't binge. I couldn't do it. And I was struggling with my bulimia still, but I just couldn't like intentionally do it if there wasn't an emotion tied to it.
Uh-huh.
And so I ended up eating this way and I felt amazing. And then with that, I found an interview with him and Rob, and then I found Rob's book. And this was like at the time, this was the only paleo book, really, like him and Lorraine, right?
Uh-huh.
Cordain. And so I read the original Human Diet, and I was like, God, this makes so much sense. And I looked at him like, I can control my bulimia this way. Never did I expect to feel better, have my hormones balanced, be, like positive and all that stuff. And so I started CrossFit at the time too, 2010, 2011. And so I started doing this and I felt amazing, but I'd never cooked before. So I made a rule with myself that when I got home, I had to teach myself how to cook because I literally felt like Superman, right? Like I didn't need to purge anymore or anything. I just felt like Superman. And I was like, oh, I'm not going to be able to cook. I'm not going to hold myself accountable. And I was like, and Facebook had just really started then,
Mhm.
like it was kind of a
Mhm.
thing. And I made a fake college account so I could get an account, right? I
Same,
registered for
same,
online
did it
schools
too.
just so I could get an account. And I was like, man, people post about their days and their lives. And I was like, wow. I was like, what if I go home and I just tell everybody I'm going to cook every day and post about it? And I did. And in that process is where caveman was born. And really, the whole reason that caveman was even a thing is I knew that if I was left alone, I wouldn't do it. But
Mhm.
if somebody knew that like I was, cooking or learning how to cook or eating good, like I had some sort of like fake mystic accountability, even though they had no clue. Um, and so I just made a rule of myself. I would just cook every day and post. And I'd eat one meal, one meal, one meal. And so while all of this like medboard process and all this stuff was going, I was cooking every day and posting it on Facebook. And so it was fine, and that was it. I mean, it was a Facebook page that started. I didn't start the blog till 2011, but I started the Facebook page in 2010. I think
Okay.
April 2010. It's weird what dates I remember and which ones I don't. And then and so then when we got to the med board side, I knew on average it took around like 7 to 9 months because there's a whole lot that goes in. They're reviewing 12 years of history, multiple doctors, multiple opinions. Like they're really being like, "Hey, we've invested $3 million in this guy. Do we
Right.
really want to let him go?" And that's kind of what it was. And and then in that process, I'd been consistent on Facebook for I think maybe 7 or 8 months, like just on a Facebook page. And I was using the notes section. You remember those? I
Yeah,
was
oh,
just
yeah.
posting recipes in the notes. And then somebody was like, "Hey, you should start a blog." And I'm like, "What the hell's a blog?" And they're like, "No, like, it's like a website." I'm like, I know what a website is, but what I don't know how to build one." They're like, "No, go to blogger.com." And I did. And, I needed to name it, and that's where the name came from. I was like, "Caveman, Paleo," and I like "Civilized Caveman Cooking Creations" because that's an easy name to spell. And I actually bought that full domain, by the way. Dumb, but I bought it. CivilizedCavemanCookingCreations.com. It was later after 10 years shortened to just Civilized Caveman. Um, and I moved everything from Facebook notes over to the website. And then that continued for probably like 3 months. I would post them on both sections, and then I was on social media. And then someone's like, "Man, you have so many recipes. I wish they were all in one place." I'm like, "Yeah." They're like, "You should make an ebook." I'm like, "Oh, sure. What do I do? How do I do it?" And they're like, "Oh, you just put them all in a document." So I did it and I gave it to them. And they're like, "Thanks, but I was gonna pay you." I'm like, "Why would you pay me? It's all on my website." And they're like, "Oh, but it's all in one place." I'm like, "Okay, and you can buy things like this on the internet?" And they're like, "Yeah, just go upload it to this website called ClickBank and send me the link and I'll buy it." I'm like, "No, I want to give it to you." And so I uploaded it to ClickBank. And this was now maybe January. It was right after Christmas, January of 2013. Yeah, January 2013. I uploaded to ClickBank. And I was like, "Now what?" And they're like, "You just have to tell everybody it's there." I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." So I'll never forget this, man. I will never forget this. I went and did a post on Facebook, and this is how good of a marketer I am, and I still am. I was like, "Hey guys, I took every recipe on the website and I put them all into one document for you, and I made it easy for you to get. And so said I should charge you money, and they said it's worth $27, so here's the link." That's what I posted. And I made my monthly salary in one day.
Wow.
And it was like $4,900. And I was kind of in shock, right? And then I was like, "This is a dream. This isn't real." And I was like, "Well, I'm glad I hit that fluke, write them out." And then the next day I came in and someone's like, "Hey, you should write a blog post on this so we can tell our friends." So I just wrote a blog post about it, what was in it, everything. So, i.e., like my first ever sales page.
Mhm.
And they're like, "Yeah, email it to everybody on the list." And my email list was like 700 people at the time. So I emailed it to everybody. And the next day I made 10 grand. And I was like, "What is going on?" And like, I was so clueless, man. Like, I had no idea any of this really existed. And then I started like really looking into it and like what I had learned. And the next day I made like another 9 grand. And within a week, I'd made like $85,000. And this was 2012, 2013, like ebook, paleo ebook. And then I was like, "Get me the hell out of the military. Like, get me out. I'm out. Like, send me home tomorrow. I don't know
Mhm.
what this is. I don't know what I'm doing, but I know I can figure it out." Like I can totally figure it out. And so at that point, I basically shifted my focus and I was like, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but apparently people like what I've done and I'm going to figure this out. And that was like a big critical tipping point for me. And that was literally like the birth of Caveman. I mean, it took a year to birth it into like what would be its first dollar. And I gave away everything for free for the first year and a half, but that's how it all came. And then I think it was like 4 months later, they came down and said, you're all done. And then I transitioned out and made it my full time gig. And that's how we got to that point.
So, when you were going through this and these people who were giving you suggestions and saying like, "Hey, you should, put this all in one place and you should put it over here and make it for sale or you should do this, you should do that." Were these people who were just your followers or were
Yeah.
they people who you knew personally?
No, no, they were just followers. Like I didn't know any of them. And like I basically learned about internet marketing through people that were followers of mine telling me what they were seeing on the internet. And I was like, "Oh, you could do that? Oh, you can do that?" And then I would go find it and I'd be like, "Oh, I want to do that." And I would try to build it or make it or do it. And I was like broke, right? So I couldn't go hire it out or take a course. I was like, "I'll just figure it out." And I like that's kind of been my mantra my whole life out of survival. It's just figure it out. And so I would see it and then someone's like, "Do you know there's a paleo conference?" I'm like, what's a conference? Like and I think a lot of people like laugh at that, right? But like I went from being a teenager to being in the military for 12 years.
Right.
I didn't know there were conferences and things like Comic-Con and like, you meet up with people in like mind. I had no clue. Like it felt like I got frozen like Captain America for 70 years and came out and I'm like, what is this? Like I didn't know any of this existed. And so, like, yeah, I was like a sponge and I was like leaning into everything. I went to every event, everything you can imagine. I just immersed myself in everything, both paleo and internet marketing and digital marketing, even though we didn't call it that back then. I just kind of everything. And really, like, it started in the end of 2010 because once I started posting on social media, I was basically doing internet marketing and people would make comments and then I'd be like, like to grow the page, I had to go work with other Facebook pages, right? Like when we actually used to trade each other and like
Mhm.
so I
Mhm.
would be introduced to new ideas. They're like, "Hey man, did you ever think about this?" I'm like, "No, what is that?" And they'd be like, "Go check this out." And so like I basically gave myself like 3 years of OJT until I realized like I actually could do something or I was good at this or I knew what I was doing to kind of make it a thing.
And just out of curiosity, when all this is happening, especially when you have, you make almost like $85,000, was any of this obviously the sales and everything were legitimate, but was this set up as a legitimate business at the
No,
time? Or was this
no.
just like, okay, so now what do I do? Like, how do I report this? How do I do taxes?
I
Like,
didn't even know I had to pay tax on it, man. I put it all in my bank account. I spent that stuff so fast. And I mean that. And like I lived with the scarcity mindset, right? So when I say I spent it, like I spent like 2 grand of it and then I hoarded the rest and pretended to be broke.
hmm
And that was a big pattern in my life. But no, man, I didn't know anything. And so when I did when I did my taxes in 2013, I was still in the military basically, right? So I had W-2 pay
hmm
and they had collected enough because I always claimed zero. I didn't know what I did, right? But they took enough, and then like all I really made that year was like that one ebook pop, and then the guy that helped me set it up ran it through his business, and so I just got the checks cut. So he actually carried most of the liabilities, um,
Mm.
and then I just had the like what was wired or transferred to me, right? And and so then it wasn't crazy enough that it scared me. Like I had to pay taxes, but basically with what I had already paid, I think I had to pay like maybe like 3 grand or something, 3 to 5 grand based on what was coming in and like expenses. And I didn't know that. I paid somebody to do my books because
Right.
that's what they said I had to do. And then I was like, okay, fine. Like, man, I can make like 100 grand and I only have to pay 3 grand. I love this game, right? Well, now, by the way, I live in California. I pay 49%, just so everybody knows. And the next year is when I got screwed. And the next year, 2014, I did $291,000 of revenue in my first year in business as an entrepreneur. And at the time, I had met my wife. She was my girlfriend at the time, and she's really successful as an entrepreneur in business. And she's like, "You don't have this. You don't have." I'm like, "Why do you need that? What is that?" I was so dumb, man, so dumb. And she started like introducing me. And so it was December of 2014, and she introduced me to our accountant and bookkeeper. And he's like, "Yeah, man, you had a good year." And I was like, "All right, so like, how much money am I gonna get back in taxes?" And he's like, "You owe $91,000." And I was like, "I have 20 in the bank, and that's like my savings." And
Mhm.
he's like, "Oh no, 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 no." And at the time, I was still just a sole proprietor. I didn't know anything. And he's like, "But you don't have to pay that. I got you." He's like, "But you kind of need a business." I'm like, "Well, what do I do?" And he's like, "Well, there's S corps and C corps," and I didn't know any of it, right? And so luckily, he did, and my wife did, and so they set up a C corporation in Wyoming for me. No, a C corporation in California and an S corp, and they basically saved me that money, and I was able to like keep it in the business. But after that point, I was like, okay, I need to learn about this stuff.
Right.
And so 2014, the end of 2014 kind of became my critical mass point of like, oh, I should probably learn how to be an entrepreneur. And all that was finding the right people. And like as they were doing things like, hey, why do you do my books this way? Like, what do I need to report? Like, how does this happen? Like, because I still don't have employees, right? It's just me. So I was like, oh, I don't get to keep it all. So I started like running a profit first model and setting money aside and, kind of doing all of that stuff. But yeah, man, I completely clueless, like on a whole different level of clueless. Like I'm still like that to this day, by the way. If I haven't experienced it, I don't know it because like I didn't go to college, I didn't read any business books. Like everything is OJT, and like yes, I'm successful in multiple seven-figure companies and all of that stuff, but still, there's a lot of things that come across my desk, weekly. I'm like, what is that? And I have to like still go learn it to this day because I don't have any lens of what it is.
And so you continue on this journey,
Yep.
posting your recipes, putting things on your blog. Things then transition out of, maybe not significantly, but things start to make a switch, and people are kind of shifting away from the written word and doing blogs, and now things are transitioning. Equipment is getting better and cheaper, and it starts to move over to video. And you start doing video. You're posting video um, recipes, and personally, one of the ones that I think is made at least probably close to once a week in the house is the Instapot buffalo chicken. If you're
Yep.
listening to
Oh,
this
it's
and
so
you
good.
haven't seen George's recipe, for the record, it is literally 3
Three
ingredients.
ingredients.
I'm not exaggerating. It is 3 ingredients. It's quite possibly the easiest thing you'll ever make, but it's so good. It's so good. We make it all the time, right? And I saw that was a video recipe that you had
Yep.
done. So, you start to make these transitions and you start to grow. Were you building relationships at that time with people who were kind of pointing you in this direction, or were you able to see these changes happening, and you were able to make these shifts and these adaptations?
Yeah, at that point, it was a whole lot of me. Most of the people that I'd surrounded myself were not really supportive. They wanted to, keep the limelight and stuff, and that was kind of how that industry was. But at that point, I'd say around once that big tax bill smacked me in the face, it kind of changed the way I looked at things, and I was like, I have to take this serious. Like, I have to take this serious. And so for me, I'm sure if you haven't caught from this point, when I do something, I do it all the way, gas pedal to the floor, non-negotiable.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of how I went about internet marketing and business. And so, like 2015, I think I 4x'd or 5x'd my company. And I didn't have a coach, I didn't have a mentor, I didn't read any books. I didn't start reading books until 2018. Like literally, I only read like 3 books in my life, like The Hot Zone, and some other ones that were required reading, like Where the Wild Things Are, right? Like that level of books, and I'm
And
not
Tim
joking.
Ferriss, and Tim
But Tim
Ferriss.
Ferriss, like I mean, like, and I'm not saying that to give like a grave example. Like at most, I read 1 book a year. Like at most, the rest of it I learned through figuring out. So like I learn by mimicking things, right? Like doing things. So if I see somebody do something, I don't need to know how they did it. I can tell by watching and then I kind of mimic it. So that's kind of how I learn. And so at this point though, like I kind of became addicted to the dopamine of, social media, right?
Mhm.
Like I was like, oh, I can grow fans. And everyone's like, oh, if you have these many fans, you can do this. And like, you can't have it and you have to do this. And I loved proving people wrong. And so like I built Caveman up to 300,000 Facebook fans and 150,000 Instagram fans. And I mean, the recipes on that website were pinned over just under 1 billion times. One of my banana bread pin got repinned 56 million times. Um, And so like I became obsessed about knowing every angle of it, like very unhealthily obsessed. And so I basically would just watch and watch and watch and watch and watch. And after a bit of time, I started to be pay attention and I could start to see the trends and the foundations and not the tactics, but like the things that were moving the needle. And so I basically was like, every time something starts, I'm going to be at the front of it. I'm going to be at the front of it. I'm going to be at the front of it. And I was like, I'll figure out it as I go. And like everything from live video to being a food blogger and getting companies like KitchenAid and Blendtec to pay me to make them recipe videos. And I was like, okay, cool, right? Like I'll take this all day. Like, and I even remember live video when live video came out. The first one that really trended was Meerkat, and everyone's like, "Oh, it's not going to work." Then Periscope came,
Mhm.
and I jumped on both of them, and I got a following on both. And then like they kind of dwindled, and then Facebook's like, "We're doing live," and everyone's like, "That's never going to work. That's never going to work." And I was like, "Oh man, you have no clue." So the day, and I mean the day Facebook Live was released, I went live that day, and I went live every single day for 9.5 months every day. And I didn't miss one. And I went up 130,000 fans in 9 months when the algorithm was quote unquote broken.
Mhm.
And I did one live video, 6.5 million views, made me $200,000. I didn't even sell anything, but there were 7,000 comments on it, and we DM'd every single person because I believe in relationships. And I was like, "Thank you so." It took me like 4 days to respond to every comment. I was like, "Thank you so much for commenting my videos. Is there anything I can do to help you? Is there anything I can do to help you? Do you need new recipes?" And so, like for me, I think because I grew up in a life where all I wanted was somebody to care about me and to be connected and to respond, I've carried that lesson into business and it's kind of become the premise of everything that I do. And so I didn't really start taking mentorship like, or even thinking it seriously until probably 2016, 2017. And I had the best mentor in the world, which is my wife, but I couldn't hear her because I was so damaged and broken and scared. Um, and now I still implement every piece of her advice that she's given me over the last 7 years, and it's the reason I'm successful. And now I have other people in my life that help me because I see that. But yeah, it was a whole lot of trial and error, trial and error, trial and error, trial and error, and that ended up being, one of the demises of the company in a good way. But the company's fine, just I'm not in it anymore. Um, but yeah, it's kind of really interesting. It's like what I told people. I was like, I don't know who, call it the universe, call it God, call it whatever. They have these bumpers on my life, like bumper bowling, and they never let me fail too far without coming to a realization. And then they put me right down the middle. And I just kind of go down with reckless abandon until I figure it out. And that's kind of how I live my life.
Well, and so you kind of brought it up there, but obviously it's a topic that I wanted to touch on, and I
Totally.
told you before we started recording that one of the things that I noticed that started to happen was that I started to see your content that you were posting change. And I started to
Yep.
see, you were still posting recipes, but you were also talking a lot about self awareness and taking care of yourself and, really focusing on not just your physical health, but your mental health. And I could see these changes happening. And then it was almost a blind side, but then, obviously now looking back, and I'm sure you can say the same thing, but, when you made the announcement that, and at the time, I don't know how I don't remember how you worded it, but you said that there was gonna be someone, I think, taking over Civilized
Yep.
Caveman, and I think you said you were stepping away.
Yep.
Um, I mean, I was just like, "Wait a minute, this no, like, this Civilized Caveman is George, like, there is no someone else."
Yeah.
Was it all of the practice that you were doing and all of this self-care, or was this something that was building for much longer, and it wasn't just kind of what we could see as
Yeah.
followers of the page?
Yeah. It wasn't what you could see. It was probably 2 years in the making. And near the end, I was losing almost $40,000 a month on that company. And it wasn't because it wasn't a profitable company, it's because I was in denial, and there were layers upon layers, right? So you hear me tell this story, right? Obviously, I struggle with addiction. I struggle with bulimia. I struggled with substance abuse. I struggled with all of those things. Well, I also struggled with social media addiction and all the dopamine of living my life for other people. And I would take everything to social media. My wife didn't get anything. My kids didn't get anything. My friends didn't get anything. Like it was all about me and my ego, right? Very unhealthily, right? Like if I was sad, I'd go to social media, I'd get all the dopamine and I'd be happy again, but I wasn't, right? Nobody got me. It was all reactive, 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 reactive. And so as I started doing work like personal development work and then becoming a personal development coach and doing, spiritual work and mindset and consciousness and all these different things, this massive line of demarcation was in, because the amount of dissonance that was being created was crazy, and it felt like Jekyll and Hyde. Every moment I was off of all that stuff, I felt amazing. But then my addiction to the dopamine and all of the validation would bring me back. And it was like this, oh, it was like battle. It felt like battle every day. And so then I'm sure you noticed that over time, I would talk more about self awareness, but I would also get sparser and sparser and sparser.
Mhm.
And those moments I was out living my life, and like they were the happiest times. But then I was like, I felt indebted. And quite frankly, I was fucking petrified. Like, what am I supposed to do? Like, how do I don't have another skill set. Like, all I saw was I'm a food blogger. This is it. And like, I wasn't doing good at that because it was killing me.
Mhm.
And so I don't know, I just kept going and kept going, and at this time, secretly, a couple companies had hired me for advice on how I did what I did. Because like, I did some crazy stuff with Caveman, like, number 1 app in the world, 22-week New York Times bestseller, like, I broke records like people couldn't even imagine. They're like, "How'd you do this? How'd you do this?" And so they started hiring me, and I started to get the glimpse that like, "Oh, there might be something else for me." But I was really, really, really romantic about Caveman, right? Because I was like, "That's mine. I created that. That's me." And that identity is what created the dissonance, right? Because that's not me. Like, I am me, right? Like, not Caveman, not my business, not my photos, not my social, like just me. And as I started to really kind of come into alignment with myself, that started getting crystal clear. And I almost got divorced over that business. I hurt a lot of people because of my addictions and like my kind of like my unhealthy way in which seeing it, right? Like, and that's how I kind of knew it was a problem. And then there's that one period where I was like, I'm doing some work, and I went dark for like 6 months, like just stopped posting.
Mhm. I remember that.
Yeah. And that was me in the jungle with shamans and my wife and myself, and working on myself, and lots of EMDR and psychotherapy and things that, like, because really what had happened is I started growing and I had it, like, it was magnifying the things that I still had to work on. And I was like, I can't even be on this thing. Like, I hated it. I deleted the apps off my phone, and I was like, all right, I'm ready to go back. And when I went back, it never felt the same, but I had closure. And I was like, yeah, this, I don't think this is for me, but I got to think on it. And people wanted me to sell it. They wanted me to be silent in it. They wanted me to bring this on. They wanted to run it. And I just, like, when you know in your soul, like, you just know what you have to do, and it's not popular, but you're like, that's the only path for me.
Mhm.
I just knew. And I was like, I keep trying to write another chapter for this book, and I just have to accept that I have to write the conclusion. And so, at the time, I'm friends with a lot of people, and my buddy Josh Trent from Wellness Force was, doing amazing, and he had a very similar audience, big heart, amazing man. And I was like, all right, so I can't sell it, like, because what it felt like to me is I was selling an addiction. That's what it felt like, right? I felt like I was monetizing something that I shouldn't have, and that company was amazing. It literally was the vessel that kept me alive. I cured my bulimia. Like, I literally changed the world. Like, I affected like 100 million plus people. Like, total website views on that website, while I owned it, was over 400 million people. Like, I had a positive impact, whether no matter what, that doesn't get taken away from me, right? Whether I'm here or not, right? And I was
Mhm.
like, okay, I can like put my head down and be proud of this, not have it be bad, but I can't be tied to it anymore. And so I made the decision overnight, didn't tell anybody. I called Josh and I was like, hey man, I'm giving it to you. Do you want it? He said, yeah. And I said, I'm not talking about like next year, next week. I'm talking about tomorrow. And he said, okay. And we jumped on a call. I hooked him and my team up, and they spent like 3 weeks kind of transitioning everything over. And then I did that one video you saw with him and I walking through my neighborhood.
Yep.
And it was 19 minutes. And I didn't want to do it, but I felt like I had to close it, and that people deserve some level of closure. And I knew Josh would take care of them, whatever that looked like, wherever they were. And like, I wouldn't be gone forever, but I needed a break. And so that was the day I deleted social media. And I stayed off social media for over a year, like everything, deleted Instagram, Twitter, like, I was gone, not one thing in my life. And it was amazing, because that was a catalyst to probably like the last bit of healing I had to do to like realize that I belong here and I can be a husband and a father and those things. And um, if I kept that, I'd probably be single right now and not in a good place, because it was just dragging on the inevitable, and I needed that piece to go away, or to close per se, so that I could see what I see now.
And so when you talk about this, obviously you're making it seem like not I shouldn't say that, but it kind of is coming across it like it was something that was easy. Like you woke up and you're like, "Nope, I'm giving this to you tomorrow," right? You went through the
Oh
whole
yeah,
thing. But
it wasn't easy.
no, I'm
No,
sure that it wasn't. I mean, this was literally your baby that you raised from 0
yeah,
to, 10 years old, maybe even almost 12 years old. But
yep,
when you talk about coming to the realization that, okay, I either need to step away from this or I'm going to end up divorced or, by myself or just in a very, very bad place. What was some of the work that you did in order to come to that realization?
yeah. No, that's it's an amazing question. So first, I listened to everybody around me, my wife, my daughter, my friends, um, and it was like I was in denial for a long time. They had seen it coming for years. Um, the biggest Probably one of the biggest catalysts for me was EMDR, which is called eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And I started EMDR to work on my traumas, right? So, I've rest in peace. 28 of my Marines are no longer here, and I witnessed 3 of them commit suicide. And that's a hard pill to swallow. So I've had to do a lot of work on that, letting go of blame and fault. And so I went and saw this EMDR therapist for almost 18 months to work on that. But what I uncovered was that and how it was roped into my childhood wounds and roped into my belief system and roped into my business, right? Because I was building things around me to keep me in those spaces. So that was a big catalyst. That's kind of where my eyes kind of opened, like what's here and what's happening and things like that. And then through the tone of it, my wife and I separated twice because I was just a monster, still in my addiction, emotionally just ragdolling people, but every time, like, my baseline never kind of went back to like denial. It was more and more. And then I got into breath work. I got into cold therapy. I got into basically like consciousness and mindset. And the more I did and the more I kind of plugged into myself, the more clarity I had that that wasn't for me. It didn't feel that easy. Like I felt like I was mourning a death, right? Like I literally felt like I was, this is going to sound extreme. It felt like I was killing a child. Like I was abandoning like my own child is what it felt like. And in a way I was. In a way I was. And this is going to get a little esoteric for you for some people, but like in a way I was because the man, I'll call it the wounded little boy that built that company and was running that company needed to be let go in order for me to be here. And so, yeah, it wasn't like an overnight thing. It was like even when I put it in my brain of like the possibility of like maybe I'll sell it or maybe I'll walk away, I was probably depressed for 4 months before I made the decision. 4 months, and I remember it, and it was
Mhm.
ugly. It was hard. I was falling back into like binge eating, but I didn't purge, right? Like there were things that I was like, okay, like I want something different, but like it literally felt like I was killing something. And and it was when really the cards were stacked against me. And I mean, like my wife and I were not in a good place. My daughter didn't even want to spend time with me. My wife's family was like, we don't like being around you. Like it was ugly. Like it was really ugly, really ugly. I had gained weight again. I was depressed. I was like mopey. It was like I was this dark storm cloud hovering around people. And so literally it got to a point where it's like, okay, what do I have to lose? And what do I have to gain? And I was like, if I maintain this, I'm going to have this company and that's all I'm going to have. That's it. Because I'm going to be overweight, depressed, childless, wifeless, friendless, familyless, soulless, happyless. Or I could make a hard decision, and I've made plenty of those. And I look back and I'm like, they told me I'd never walk again. They told me I couldn't tie that world record. They told me I couldn't do it. I'm like, is this another one of those things where like I have to prove it? I have to prove it. I'm like, I've been trying to prove this for 8 years and I proved it. Like there's nothing else for me to prove. And then like it's okay to walk away. It's okay to pivot. It's okay to be like I played my best game. And like now I'm doing a disservice to the people who follow me because I was not in a place emotionally, physically, or anything to lead people. And everybody needed to know, but really I needed to accept the fact that I had to grow and I had to let it go. And it took months and months for me to get to this point. But once I got to that point, it kind of like hit me and it wasn't heavy and it wasn't hard. It was like invigorating. And it was like, man. And to be frank, if I could describe it, it felt like I cut a 700-pound anchor off my feet and I could fly again. And so I look back and people ask me all the time, did you do anything different? Like it was a 7-figure company. Like, and it wasn't much to turn it around. It was my spending habits and self-sabotage that was making it lose money. Um, do you regret it? And I'm like, no. And they're like, would you do anything different? I'm like, no, I wouldn't. I really, really wouldn't. And I'm proud of that to this day. I'm proud of that company. I'm proud of the cookbook. I'm proud of every single thing I created, every single person I touched, every single email I wrote. And I'm proud of every single person that followed me, like you, sticking with me and accepting me as a human, not as like this company or person, like understanding that that was a part of my process and my growth. And we all grow. And that was what I had to do to get to the next level. And probably single handedly, one of the top 3 most pivotal decisions in my entire life.
And so you make this transition, you go on a complete break, and really you're, I'm sure, still building this business that you're currently working on now,
Oh
but
yeah, for sure. For sure.
is there anything from Caveman that you know that you don't want to replicate in this business that you have now? Or, is it just this is something that's completely different, and, you are a completely different person now at this point as well, and you are still focused on building the relationships just as you were when you were doing Caveman, but there's just been so much growth that there's really no chances of anything that kind of was happening at the end of Caveman that's going to transition into now this new company.
Yeah, yeah, I could name 1,000 lessons I didn't want to bring forward, so I didn't bring any of them. But really, I think what it was is like foundationally, like there were some things that I wanted to bring forward of like changing who I was, like communication, openness, right? Like compassion and empathy, but not for my fans, for me,
Mhm.
right? Like relinquishing the perfection and the pressure, right? Like really being like, hey, I want to help everybody and it's okay if I don't have the answer. And I can say that, right? And like I want to be everywhere all the time, but it's unsustainable from like, I'm going to go live every day for 74 years straight, right? Like, no, like, so like really one of it was like really using what I had learned through Caveman. And it took me a year to reflect on these before I even thought about like coming out into the world again. And I knew I was there because, people were asking me questions about it and what I had learned. And I was talking about it like in past tense, but in very positive language. I'm like, yeah, when I did this and I learned this, and I kind of knew I was on the other side of it. And I was like, all right, I'm ready to kind of share this with the world. And so, like, for me, I'd say the biggest lesson, and I mean the biggest one that carries over business, life, or anything, um, is that I can always pivot, always, right? Like, there's one guarantee in this world, and I'm going to die. That's it. That's it. And so I look at it in my life and in my business and with my students and everything I teach. And I'm like, if there's a moment, in any moment that you don't feel good, that you feel it's complicated or it's not clear, it's not simple, stop and pivot. Because really, there's no other way for us to live this life. None. Same thing with business, right? And, like, for example, I'll give you a perfect example. In our current business, and our current business is very successful. Like I'm good. I'm very good. Like I own 9 companies now. I have supplement companies, a diaper bag company, a protein bar company. Like I got my hands in enough pots. Like I'm good. And we all run them and we all learn these lessons. But when I really, really, really look at it, I'll give you an example. We, in my personal business, under my name, my brand, we teach people marketing and consulting and business and scaling and all this stuff. And everyone's like, we want you on Instagram. We want you on Instagram. I'm like, okay, cool. So maybe 3 months ago, we launched Instagram. We're posting twice a day, the best of the best of the best of the best. And I don't like it. And it didn't feel good. And it was stressful for my team. It wasn't really a good payoff, best use of time. So last week I said, hey, everybody, I love you. We're getting back off Instagram. It's been fun, but I don't want to be on this platform. I'll see you on my podcast. And I had zero hesitation, zero reservations, and I was like, bye, right? And that's a big shift for me, right? Like I'm like, oh, here we go. And like really honoring myself and honoring my word. But really what that gives me the ability to do is to honor my word to my students, because it gives me the time and the space with what supports me being my best self to support them. And so, pivoting. My buddy Adam Markel wrote an amazing book on this called Pivot. And He is absolutely amazing. He's literally stood on stage. He's probably keynoted for over 4 million people through trainings and personal development and pivoting, but it's a really just good concept. And I think in business and in life and even the current state of the world that we're living in, I think it's really easy to feel trapped and burdened and kind of weighed down. And if we shift 1 degree to the left, there's no weight there. And it's just that simple sometimes. And so that's probably for me the biggest lesson is like I'm now no longer afraid to be like, hey, this isn't working, or I want to do it differently, or I need to make an adjustment. Where in the past, because of fear or not knowing, like, no, I'm gonna ride this out. Like I'll figure it out. Like I'll work on this till I bleed. And I'm like, I don't want to bleed to be successful. That's stupid. Like I don't want to hustle harder. That's freaking stupid. No, I want to be happy and I want to help people and I want to fill my tank. I want to fill my family's tank and I want to have a positive impact. And if there's anything in my day or my life or my business that's taking from that, it needs to be looked at and adjusted. And that's kind of how I carry this stuff forward now.
And so just to kind of play off that just for one more question because
Please.
I have taken I feel like I'm taking away from you now. We're probably close to way over. But it's been such a great conversation. The last question or some form of the last question that I always ask my guests is that there's people out there, and the reason that I started this podcast and the reason for me sharing my story and now having the ability to share other stories is that I want to motivate somebody that was in a position like you were in a position like I was in, who you're sitting on the couch and you want to do something, you want to make a change, but you have one excuse or another that you're still allowing to stop you from taking that first step. So to the person who's listening to this right now who has not taken that first step, what is one piece of advice that you could offer to them to help them kind of get going?
What a great question. And I'm gonna answer it in a couple parts because they all matter. So for me, one of my business partners and friends and soul brothers and really my husband, right? Craig, my wife wouldn't mind, but Stefanos Stefandros is absolutely amazing, and we talk about this a lot. And he looks me square in the eye and he said, if you want to deepen your impact, deepen your practice. And you know, a lot of the times when I look back in my life, there are a lot of things that I wanted to do because I saw them in the world. I'm like, oh, I can do this, I can make this change. But really, what I was saying is, I want to be the change. And I kept putting it outside of myself. And so for me, relinquish, and I mean this, relinquish responsibility that somehow you have to change the world or you have to change yourself because the world, like, really, it's got to be in integrity with self. Like, hey, I want to make a change. Cool. Why? And it's got to be relevant to you. It's got to be connected to your why. Like, why do you want to do this? And then when you get really clear on that, create a game that you can win. If you say you want to go run a marathon, please do not try to run a marathon tomorrow. For me, I would just tell you to drink 8 ounces of water today and then go for a 5 minute walk tomorrow. And just like anything, like when we're teaching a child to walk, we're not like stand up and go. Like we go through the paces, we go through the practices, and wherever you are in your life, you didn't get there overnight and you're not going to get out of it overnight. But that's the beautiful part. That means that you getting started is easy. You just have to pick one thing that if you do it, whether it's drinking water, making a plan, putting it on your calendar, going for a walk, texting somebody, writing a letter, you can make it a minute, 5 minutes, or 10 minutes, but you just have to pick one thing every day and put it into practice. And I hear it, well, I've been thinking about that, been thinking about that. That's where community comes in. And I believe in accountability and I believe in team. We are not solo creatures. And so when you get clear on what you want to do and the easiest path to get there, find somebody that's supportive, a community that's supportive, a friend, a mentor, somebody, and tell them what you want to do and just ask them to be your teammate and tell them that you're on this journey with them. And then you make a commitment together and you go. And here's the biggest part of all of this. You're not going to play the game perfectly. There is no perfect game. There is no perfect match. If you think about every NFL player, if they only played for the perfect game, we'd have no sports, right? They lose, they fumble, they get intercepted, they just pick it up and start again. So keep these in your mind moving forward. There is no fault, no blame, no guilt, and no shame. And so if you make a commitment and you're going to walk for 10 minutes a day and 7 days in, you miss it, great. You look at it and be like, wow, I missed it. What happened? What worked? What didn't work? What can I do different? But please don't slash the other three tires because you get one. Just change the tire and get back on the horse. Be like, oh, it's 11 p.m. I can still go. I got an hour. Or, hey, for whatever reason today I needed it, but tomorrow, non-negotiable, the first thing I do is I'm going for a 10-minute walk. And that's the way that I recommend everybody do all of this, because it's the way that I live my life. And the way to win life is to have a series of small marginal victories every single day that add up over time, not one big swing in the opposite direction.
I love that. I love that, and I'm a big fan of that. I'm a big fan of taking small chunks. So I'm not going to take anything away from what you just said. The last thing that I do need from you is please let the listeners know where they can find you and they can connect with you. I know you're not on Instagram anymore, but you've mentioned your podcast and stuff. So please just let us know where we can keep up with you.
Totally. Instagram is up. I might do stories, but there's a video on there that says, hey, go to my website. But my website is really easy. It's mindofgeorge.com. MindOfGeorge. And on there, you'll have a link to my Facebook group. It's free. We give away everything for free. We give our content for free. We give our podcast for free. And we are committed to helping anybody. And by the way, even if you're not an entrepreneur or you don't own a business, my podcast talks about mindset, personal development, life, habits, and things like that. And really, if there's anything we can do to support you, join our Facebook group, send me a message, tag me in a post. I will personally respond, I promise, and we will do anything we can to support.
I appreciate it. Well, George, again, thank you so much for sitting down. I appreciate the extended length of time that you gave me. As I said, I really enjoyed the conversation. So I look forward to sharing this one with everybody.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me. And for everybody listening, I just want to say thank you, because you have given me a gift that I can never give back to you, and that is time. And I know how valuable it is. So thank you for trusting me. Thank you for honoring me. And thank you for hearing me.
All right. That is my interview with George Bryant. And typically, if I had an interview of this length, I would actually usually split it into two. But given George's story and how well I think the conversation flowed, I didn't want to put a stop in the middle of the conversation there. I wanted to just put the entire episode out there all at once. And I figured if you wanted to split it, that's something that you could definitely do on your own. So I appreciate you guys coming over and hanging out with us. I really hope that you enjoyed this conversation. If you could do me a huge favor, it's only going to take you a couple minutes, but if you could leave a review on whatever app it is that you are using to consume this podcast, that would be something that is very, very helpful. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast so you know when new episodes drop. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed. It was great to have you. We'll see you next week.